spell doesn't work. And yeah, I mean, is that fantasy stuff the same as demonic worship, or can that be a play sort of thing that doesn't mean anything? I think different people may see it in different ways. All right, going on in the handout then. The burning of spells written in these books represents a renunciation of the faith behind them. And this is the purpose of Paul's miracles. In the context of a city that thrived on fake magic and demonic activity, Paul shows true miraculous power from God. It was clear even to unbelievers that Paul wielded a greater power than what they had. So this is a public burning of books that many would consider sacred. I mean, this could have been scandalous, burning the books, especially worth that kind of money, that people genuinely believed in this stuff. And now you're dissing their faith by burning their books, but these magicians are doing this willingly, renouncing their faith in these things. So this is a major coup, and this kind of sets up what's going to happen next in Acts. Because this magic stuff, the Ephesian grammata, the amulets, the symbols people would wear, all of that was big money. And Ephesus, seventh wonder of the world, Temple of Artemis, big money in idolatry and mysticism and magic. Always follow the money when there's a problem. And here it's no different for what's about to happen. Verse 21 and 22. When these things were accomplished, Paul proposed in the Spirit when he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia to go to Jerusalem, saying, after I have been there, I must see Rome. So he sent into Macedonia two of those who ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, but he himself stayed in Asia for a time. Now this is right before the big thing happens next in Ephesus. So Paul, it says here, proposed, made up his mind, kind of decided if God would allow, he would go first to Jerusalem, and then he would like to see Rome. There's actually great irony in this. Paul would, in fact, go see Rome, but he would be in chains, and he would also be killed there. He would be in Rome when Nero was Caesar. Nero hated Christians, and Nero ultimately beheaded Paul. So God would grant his desire, but not in the way Paul probably understood it in the moment. Also, the two guys he sent on, he said, sent to Macedonia. So if you look at the map that we had on the second page, Paul's in Ephesus, which is in Asia Minor, and Macedonia is over here to the left, essentially modern-day Greece. He sends Timothy and Erastus over there, kind of across this little Aegean Sea strait, to Corinth area, and that's where they're going to be for now, with the intent that he'll join them. What we know of Timothy, we've discussed Timothy, we've seen him before here in Acts. Born of a Jewish mother and a Greek father, raised in the area of Lystra and Derbe. He started traveling with Paul after Paul's second missionary journey. He would eventually become a pastor that Paul would send into troubled congregations to help them. He seems to have been fairly young, maybe 20s, unknown for sure. We know that because Paul tells him, don't let anybody despise your youth. So he was unusually young for occupying a position of spiritual leadership like this. According to 1 Timothy 5:23, he suffered from frequent stomach problems. Paul tells him a little wine is good for the stomach and your frequent infirmities. My personal opinion, I think it's stress-related because I've been there. There are times when you live on Tums for months at a time. I wouldn't doubt that Timothy's was something like this. In an age with no Tums, wine is the second best, I suppose. Or maybe wine is the first best. I should try that instead of the Tums. So, yeah, Timothy was a faithful, young, and sincere pastor that Paul would send into these rough situations. Erastus, we don't hear as much about him in Scripture, but he is mentioned several times. Mentioned in 2 Timothy 4:20 as having been left in Corinth, which was the troubled congregation out of all of these. They had the most issues. So Erastus had to be a man of skilled at handling conflict. Romans 16:23 may be a reference to the same man who's mentioned as a treasurer of the city of Corinth. So he's a man of some political esteem, but a faithful Christian. Now, the conflict, verses 23. Actually, let's go 20, where are we? 20, yeah, there we are, 23 to 27. About that time, there arose a great commotion about the way. For a certain man named Demetrius, a silversmith who made silver shrines of Diana, that's Artemis in the Greek, brought no small profit to the craftsmen. He called them together with the workers of similar occupation and said, "Men, you know that we have our prosperity by this trade. Moreover, you see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but throughout almost all Asia, this Paul has persuaded and turned away many people, saying they are not gods, which are made with hands." So not only is this trade of ours in danger of falling into disrepute, but also the temple of the great goddess Diana may be despised and her magnificence destroyed, whom all Asia and the world worship. So follow the money. That's the problem. These people are putting our trade at risk. They're not selling as many trinkets and idols. This conflict is unusual for Paul because almost all of his other conflicts that he faced in this part of the world came from the Jews who rejected his teaching on the law, because Paul was teaching that the ceremonial law was no longer necessary for salvation. The Jews rebelled. Here in Ephesus, the Jews don't seem to be rebelling at that, which is unusual. But the unbelievers in the town are rebelling, which is also unusual. So this is a very different kind of issue Paul faces. It's called the way in verse 23, a commotion about the way, which we've seen before, that this is what they called Christianity originally. And I believe it's based on Jesus' own statement, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." So early Christianity was called the way, as a way of pointing to Jesus himself. I am the way. What the conflict shows is that there had been significant progress in converting heathen non-Jews to the faith. Significant enough, in fact, to cut into the business of the idol makers. You know, if Ephesus is estimated between 200,000 and 300,000 people, second or third biggest in the ancient world, in this part of the world. For these guys to feel it in their pocket is really says a lot, because that's a big client base to be selling idols and trinkets to. They could afford to lose a couple hundred, people converting to Christianity and not feel it. But if they're feeling it, that's a lot of people who are of that 250,000 plus that are not going to follow their idolatrous former ways. So the conversion had to have been fairly large in Ephesus. Or maybe it was also paranoia too. They didn't want to risk anything more. Here in the English, again, it's called Diana, which is unfortunate because it's really not Diana. Here's a quote from F.S. Bruce explaining this. The Ephesian Artemis was a very different goddess from the queen and huntress, chaste and fair, whom the Greeks venerated by the name Diana. She was in origin an ancient mother goddess of Asia Minor, worshipped in that land from time immemorial as the mother of gods and men. Her temple at Ephesus was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Her image enshrined in that temple was believed to be of heavenly workmanship. It appears to have been a meteorite in which semblance of a many-breasted female was discerned. So they're calling this goddess the same as the one that they worship in Rome, Artemis, but this Artemis is something altogether different. The one in Rome, also called Diana, was a fertility goddess, a huntress. Well, back that up. A huntress and a god for harvest. This goddess seems to be more of a fertility goddess. Her images, I did not give you one of these images. They still exist, but they picture, a woman with many breasts, emphasizing the whole fertility aspect of her. So this was big business and also played into the sex trade of the ancient world.
Pastor,
Yes?
would this have been the only other religion
No.
other than Christ?
No. The Romans and the Greeks were polytheists, so there were multiple shrines and temples to multiple different gods. But, each city kind of had its own claim to fame. It's kind of one god that dominated. So here it's Artemis as a point of pilgrimage, as kind of their main money-making scheme for the tradesmen in town. Yeah.
Is this where Greek mythology comes in?
This is still left over from Greek mythology. Yes, the Romans kind of adopted Greek myths, renamed some of the gods. Really, the pantheon of gods in Rome is essentially the same gods that the Greeks had. They just renamed them. So, you get the planetary names under the Roman gods of Venus, Mercury, Mars, Jupiter. Jupiter in Rome is the same as the Greek god Zeus. So yeah, it's all the Greek gods still there. All right. What I kind of found as ironic and maybe poetic is the fact that this temple to Artemis, which was such a big deal, huge money-making thing, the center of Ephesus. Eventually, I showed this in previous handouts. Now, what's left of it is one single broken down column out of this forest of hundreds of columns that went 60 feet high and 6 foot diameter. There's one broken down column left of it, and all the rest of it is missing. It's just gone. Where did it go? There seems to be the belief that a lot of the marble that was used for the Temple of Artemis was carted off to the north to what was then Constantinople and used in the construction of the Hagia Sophia, which you see there on the bottom, which was, or maybe is, was the greatest Christian cathedral ever constructed. The Hagia Sophia is, I personally think, is greater than any of the cathedrals in Europe. It is the premier Christian cathedral. It's utterly gorgeous. Another wonder of the world for the time, although it was never actually called that. But all the marble from this pagan goddess is now converted into the basis of this new Christian place of worship in Constantinople. It was, by the way, seized by the Muslims when they finally overtook Constantinople. So now if you go there, it is in modern-day Turkey, you'll see Muslim symbols, which you can kind of see in the picture to the right. You see these sort of Arab words up on the circles to the right and the left. and it's been converted to a mosque, which is utterly heartbreaking. But it was not a mosque originally. It was devoted to the true God. So anyway, great irony there that this great goddess worship ultimately fell in service to the one true God. All right. On the top of the next page. So unlike many of the trumped-up charges brought by the Jews, Demetrius is in fact accurate in his description of the issue. That is, he's claiming that Paul is converting many people and they're losing business. So it's true. He's not trumping up a charge, to his credit. And he did, in fact, teach that the gods made by hands are not true gods. So he's also right about that accusation. Verses 28 and 29. When they heard this, they were full of wrath and cried out, saying, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." So the whole city was filled with confusion and rushed into the center with one accord, having seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, Paul's travel companions. They drag them to this open-air theater, which still exists in Ephesus. There's pictures of it. The upper picture is an artist's reconstruction of what it probably looked like when in Paul's day. And what's left of it is the lower right picture. But a magnificent structure capable of housing, of sitting 25,000 people. So very large. It says that they dragged him, verse 29, the whole city filled with confusion rushed in the theater with one accord, that is, of one mind. What their mind was, it was confusion. They wanted to do something. They were unhappy about the threats against Artemis because it threatened business, so they were of one mind wanting to do something. They didn't know what, though, because we'll see their confusion later. They grabbed the first two Christian leaders they could find. They don't seem to be able to find Paul. They grab a guy named Gaius, another guy named Aristarchus. What we know about these guys, Gaius converted in Derbe, which was, north, one of those little cities where Paul went through before. He was actually baptized by St. Paul, one of the few people that could claim that. May also be the same man who became close friends with the Apostle John and was noted for his generosity in ministry by the Apostle John. So he was very active, traveling with the apostles. Aristarchus became a close associate and traveling companion of Paul's. He's described as Paul's fellow prisoner in Colossians and fellow laborer in Philemon. So he's with Paul through a lot of stuff and seems also to have been arrested with Paul and been in chains with Paul. So these are both men who are very faithful, preachers and teachers, who suffer with Paul, who go with him and endure all the things he endured. If you got to seize a couple of guys that represent Christianity, these are the guys to seize. It says they're both natives of Macedonia. Verse 30 to 31. And when Paul wanted to go into the people, the disciples would not allow him. Then some of the officials of Asia, who were his friends, sent to him pleading that he would not venture into the theater. So Paul, to his credit, did not want to see his friends get beat up because they couldn't find him, so he was going to offer himself up for them. It speaks of Paul's bravery and his trust in God. Nobody would let him do it, though, because they probably feared for his life. It says in the text, verse, or was it 31? Some of the officials of Asia. That's an interesting thing, because the Greek name for these guys are not just some officials. They have a specific title, Asiarchs. It's an official who's connected with the worship of Rome and the Roman emperor in the province of Asia. So here's a little background of what an Asiarch is on the top of the next page. Each of the cities of proconsular Asia at the autumnal equinox assembled its most honorable and opulent citizens in order to select one to preside over the games to be exhibited that year at his expense in honor of the gods and the Roman emperor. Thereupon each city reported the name of the person selected to a general assembly held in some leading city, as Ephesus, Smyrna, or Sardis. This general council selected 10 out of the number of candidates and sent them to the proconsul. And the proconsul apparently chose one of these 10 to preside over the rest. This explains how it is that in Acts, the passage cited several Asiarchs that spoke. Perhaps the title also outlasted the service. So these, first of all, these are guys who are like the richest of the rich, because they have to host mini Olympics at their own expense. Huge expense. Furthermore, not only are they the richest of the rich, these are guys who are also in charge of assuring the worship of the Roman emperor and the Roman gods. So there's a religious aspect to these guys too. They're supposed to use their money in the promotion of false gods. Why would guys who are, the top of the social ladder financially and known to support false idol worship, why would they speak up to protect Paul? Unknown. The commentators I read said that, well, they're fair-minded Romans that knew Paul was going to get lynched for trumped-up charges, and they respected Paul's freedom of speech with this. That seems to be what the majority of commentators say. I don't know that I buy that. Because one thing, they didn't care about freedom of speech like we do. And what Paul stood for really went against everything these guys were supposed to stand for. So what's the possible explanation? I personally think that some of these guys were converted to Christianity. I think it went that high up the ladder socially that even some of the richest of the rich in that upper crust of the social ladder, even they came to receive Jesus and identify with the Christians.
Also, this title, patriarch, was a lifetime title.
Yeah.
Even when you might have retired or no longer had your orders, you still held a title, like a former governor or former president,
Right.
former judge, or
But that's a huge coup for one of those guys to turn, to convert. But you're right, so it could have been retired guys. But even so, maybe that explains why this Demetrius guy is just so infuriated and worried about where this is headed for his business sake, because even the upper levels of society in Ephesus were turning to Christianity. So they all intervene and try and protect Paul, to their credit. How we doing? We're okay. 32. Some therefore cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was confused and most of them did not know why they had come together. It's a mindless mob is what it is. Earlier it said they were of one mind, but it's a very confused mind. They were just there to lynch somebody. They wanted blood. They didn't know why or what or who. They were utter confusion. Verse 33 to 34, and they drew Alexander out of the multitude, the Jews putting him forward. And Alexander motioned with his hand and wanted to make his defense to the people, but when they found out that he was a Jew, all with one voice cried out for about 2 hours, "Great is Diana of the Ephesians." The Alexander figure is another questionable figure, exactly who he was. It says in the text he was a Jew. That was a word that almost became synonymous with a non-Christian, because all of the problems Paul was facing in these different congregations came from the Jews. So it's probable Alexander is not a Christian. He was not pushed forward to defend Christianity. He was pushed forward to defend the Jews against the charge that this was all their fault, because this was happening from the synagogues. Paul would come into town and work in the synagogues, convert these people to Christianity, and then the pagans around them in society afterwards. So the Jews got a reputation as being the source of this Paul problem. So it almost seems like this Alexander guy was of the Jewish party, and he was going to explain, this is not our fault. You know, this isn't coming from us. Don't blame the Jews. Because Alexander is mentioned in other places. If it's the same one, and it's kind of not sure that it is the same one. But he's mentioned in Timothy, mentioned in Mark. Okay, interesting. True.
If they just leave a name and don't say who it was, it's usually someone who the reader would know.
It's assumed you figured out. Yeah, you would know. Right.
If the name was unimportant, if it was just a stranger, you would just say a man so.
Right.
Came to help or did this.
Yeah, good point.
Name, you would have to assume that someone the reader would know.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you look this up in Timothy, what Paul says about this guy in Timothy, you can get a flavor of, you know, what his association was with Christianity. So 1 Timothy 1, verse 20. There we are. Starting in verse 18. This charge I commit to you, son Timothy, according to the prophecies previously made concerning you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, having faith and a good conscience, which some, having rejected concerning the faith, have suffered shipwreck, of whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I delivered to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. So Alexander was a Christian, turned on Christianity, attacked it, and ultimately was excommunicated for it. Also, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 14 and 15, Alexander the coppersmith did me much harm. May the Lord repay him according to his works. You also must beware of him, for he has greatly resisted our words. So he did Paul much harm. Doesn't say what that harm was. But if this is kind of, the Ephesian story is sort of the public recognition of the fact that he is distancing himself from Christianity. And he's being put forward by other Jews, which means he's prominent in Jewish circles, maybe a leader against the Christians. He doesn't get anywhere. The crowd shouts him down. They don't want to hear from Jews. For 2 hours, crying out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." Can you imagine? 2 hours of thousands of people chanting this. And you just sit there and have to listen to it, waiting for your turn to finally defend yourself. Yeah, is it any different? Here's the original cancel culture. You know, they're shouting him down. They won't even let him talk for 2 hours straight.
In Mark chapter 15, verse 21, and they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to carry his cross. So Mark mentions Simon, and it says, but he's the father of Alexander and Rufus. So why would Mark say who's the father of it? Doesn't matter. Mark would know Alexander and Rufus.
Yeah, good point. So probably the same guy.
This is a
father.
Well, yes, Simon became a believer, but Alexander Rufus, yeah, we're all over the
Okay? We've got about 2 minutes. So I'm just going to read to the end of Acts 19 here so we can finish out 19. 35, when the city clerk had quieted the crowd, he said, "Men of Ephesus, what man is there who doesn't know that the city of the Ephesians is a temple guardian of the great goddess Diana and of the image which fell down from Zeus? Therefore, since these things cannot be denied, you ought to be quiet and do nothing rashly. For you have brought these men here who are neither robbers of temples nor blasphemers of your goddess. Therefore, Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen if Demetrius and his fellow craftsmen have a case against anyone, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you have any other inquiry to make, it shall be determined in the lawful assembly. For we are in danger of being called in question for today's uproar. There being no reason which we may give to account for this disorderly gathering." And when he said these things, he dismissed the assembly. He's called the city clerk. The word grammatus or grammateus literally means a writer, probably something more akin to a mayor than a city clerk. An executive officer. He kind of takes over this mob, quiets it down, and his neck is on the line. As a mayor of the city, if things go south and there's a riot and they wreck the city, Rome's going to come looking for answers to him. So he's got skin in the game, and he's trying to quiet things down to save his own neck, probably. But it's common sense, what he says. We have courts. If there's a legitimate charge, bring it to the courts. I mean, it was the right thing to say. An example of God using even unbelievers for the sake of his church. And he admits that these guys, the Christians, are not guilty of doing anything unlawful, including not even blaspheming Artemis. So the Christians weren't really out there picking a fight with the Artemis followers. They were just proclaiming the true God as the only way to salvation. By inference, of course, that means all other gods are not the way to salvation, but they weren't, it seems, going out of their way to attack you Artemis people and that big seventh wonder of the world up on the hill. All right, we got to quit. Any questions about chapter 19?
I didn't mention this town clerk's name.
Luke mentions his name?
Luke does not.
Does not mention his name. Right. Yes, it wasn't inconsequential in the Christian story afterwards. Any questions or comments? All right, let's close in with prayer. Gracious God, you have used your people in the past to proclaim you to the world, and through their humble words, you have brought many to faith. We pray that you might use us and our words in this world as well, that others might be drawn to you and might be saved through Jesus' grace that we receive again this day. In his name we pray, amen.